Good afternoon, all. How is everyone today?
Good afternoon. We're good.
Good afternoon.
How are you both? Are you good? Hi, Peter.
Hello.
So we are joined by Dr. Peter McCue today, who is going to be talking about everything to do with woodlands. So we are going to be talking about any form of either paranormal, supernatural aspect, haunted legends involving woods. Because I have done a few investigations recently in woodland environments as a test to see whether you can successfully do an investigation out in woodland areas, and it had mixed results, which I'll come to later. But that is jumping the gun. So how is everyone? How's everyone had a good week? It's been a mixed week, hasn't it, I feel?
Yeah, it has. It's been I've had quite a good week. It's been hectic as usual, but lots of good opportunities coming up. Universe seems to be yielding rather nicely.
Ooh, that's nice.
I know.
I've encountered the word, and I've got to remember it now. It was a mixture of coronavirus and roller coaster, which should make it Corona Coaster. Yeah, Corona Coaster. I think that was it. And
It sounds like a chocolate bar, doesn't it?
It does, but I think I can encounter that expression. You know, when sometimes you feel like you're on top of things, and then you just go, oh, another knockback, and then you build. For anyone trying to run events and trying to resume some form of normality, I fully understand the concept now of Corona casters, when you're up and down, up and down.
It has it's exactly been like that. I mean, I think probably what's happened is that everybody's talking about getting back to normal. I mean, there's no such thing as normal, is there anyway, right? And getting back to what their version of normal is, which is just not going to happen because we're never going to be the same people as we were before. We're not even the same people as we were yesterday, right?
Exactly.
But I also think that in our bid to get back to the normal, that people have actually forgotten how much it's actually affected certain areas of business, certain people. There was something weird that just happened right behind you there, Jonathan. Right, there was some sort of flash of light that happened behind you. Did you see that, Peter?
No.
No.
Yeah, I saw a flash of light that just went behind you. Unless, does anything reflect in from anywhere else that I maybe?
Shouldn't be. I mean, the only thing is I have got a road outside, so whether someone's it's pretty sunny, so maybe sunlight on a car might have bounced in. I'm going to look now. I'll look.
We'll be checking to make sure that if it happens again, I'll think it's definitely the road. But when you play the video back, you'll see it.
Okay. Something behind you. So this week we have been talking about woodland. So we are joined by Dr. Peter McCue, who is a retired clinical psychologist with a long-standing interest in anomalous phenomena, member of the ASSAP, SPR, and author of 3 books and numerous articles on paranormal and UFO phenomena. Now, I think we've got probably links on the Supernatural Magazine website. If not, we can put them onto the Facebook page, links to your books. But welcome, Peter. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So we are going to delve into the idea of haunted woods and what really makes woods supposedly haunted and the folklore surrounding them. So I have a series of photographs that you supplied, and we're going to talk about some of the cases of some of the woodlands involved. But if you out there have had any experiences in woodlands or strange encounters in any woods forests, do let us know. We'd love to hear from you. We'd like to share your stories with everyone watching, and maybe Peter can have an input into explaining what may be occurring, whether it be a fairy sighting, strange beast, apparition, ghost, or even UFO. Of course, lots of strange ufologists wander around woodlands as well as the ghost hunters. Never the twain shall meet. Very strange mix when you get the ghost hunters and ufologists in the same space. Very weird. So, Peter, shall we start with your first picture? It looks like a very innocent little lane. It looks very comfortable environment. So, what could you tell us about this area?
This is the area of Gorebridge, about 10 miles from the centre of Edinburgh as the crow flies, to the south east, I think roughly. Now, this area has been publicised, particularly by the late a man who lived in Edinburgh, Andrew Hennessy, who sadly died very recently. I'd never met Andrew, but I was surprised. He wasn't that, as far as I was aware, of a particularly old chap, but he died recently. But Andrew has referred to this area in internet articles and in a recent book, and he claimed that the area is a sort of hotspot for what he called alien activity. And one particular part of the area is Camp Wood, which is to the northeast of the village or town of Gorebridge. And he reported that light phenomena had been experienced in this area, that he himself had experienced anomalous lights, which didn't go with the wind, so they didn't seem to be Chinese lanterns. He referred, among other things, I think, to an incident where some people were presumably legally were trying to take trees to sell as Christmas trees, and they were chased away by, I think it was a glowing green eye, something that looked like that. Anyway, I was interested in the area from these reports. Most of the material on it I did find was from Andrew himself. I visited the area on 3 occasions and made some inquiries, and I didn't come up with confirmatory evidence, which isn't to say that what Andrew's reported is wrong. But I, for instance, during a couple of walks in the area, I spoke to a couple of people and asked them whether they, I mentioned the alleged anomalous activity, and neither of them seemed to know anything about that sort of thing. I went to the library in Gorebridge. The woman I spoke to said that she was aware of Andrew, but she wasn't aware of any other evidence, except she mentioned one UFO type sighting at what she referred to as Grange, which I probably think was a reference to Newton Grange, a nearby village, but not very much there. I was wondering whether these light phenomena associated with Camp Wood, if indeed these sort of phenomena do occur, could be related to something geological, perhaps some faulting. So I contacted the British Geological Survey, and they were helpful. The person I was in touch with was helpful, even sent me a little map showing faulting in the area. And indeed, Camp Wood is crossed by, I think, 2 or 3 faults. And as you may know, there has been speculation that light phenomena can arise from geological stresses in areas of faulting. Another thing about Gorebridge, which is worth noting, is that it's an old coal mining area. So if there were a geological factor, it could be related to the quarry coal mining activity, or some sort of interaction between local faulting and the coal mining.
Okay, fascinating. Lara, do you know this area at all?
No, I don't. No, I don't know I used to live in the Midlands, but no, I don't know that area at all. It looks fascinating, though, Peter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I got to say, I have seen somebody with yellow eyes as well. When I fell down the stairs years ago, yeah, and I looked up and I looked through the letterbox. I do get the whole yellow eyes look.
Can we just work on the sequence of events? Did you see the person then fall down the stairs, or did you fall down the stairs and in the process saw someone with yellow eyes?
I fell down the stairs. I was very, this is why I sleep with the whole light on, Jonathan, right? But I fell down the stairs as a child. I was about 4 years old. And I looked up, and weirdly, I didn't hurt myself doing that, right? When I looked up, though, the letterbox opened. It was in the stairs are right next to the front door, right? The letterbox opened, and there was these big, huge, massive yellow eyes looking at me through the letterbox. That was when I screamed, and my dad came running through. And I'm trying to tell him that somebody had looked through the letterbox, and he ran outside, but there was nobody there.
Yeah, that would creep me out.
I know. So I get the yellow eyes, Peter, definitely. You don't need to convince me. But
I think the Gorebridge it was green, not yellow, but I'd have to check.
We get people with green eyes all the time.
Yeah.
So shall we go on to the second location, which is in Fife?
Right. Now, this is a controversial case known as the Fife incident. It occurred, or allegedly occurred, in September 1996, and it involved a couple of women and their children, and they allegedly had a series of UFO sightings in this area. And there has been some question whether the events really happened, and one commentator on the case seems to have changed his mind about the case at least once. And the interesting thing about this area is that the principal events seem to have occurred more or less where that photograph was taken. I must add that I was very lucky. I didn't even notice at the time of taking the photo that a buzzard put in an appearance theatrically, as you can see. I think it's a buzzard anyway. But this location is just to the east of a hamlet called Newton of Falkland, and you'll see there are pylons there. Now, it may be purely coincidental that there are pylons there, but it's worth noting that it has been speculated that magnetic fields could possibly have an effect on people's brains, and maybe in susceptible people could induce visionary experiences. Now, whether those pylons played a role in the experience, I don't know.
I mean, it is interesting because I think if we were ever going to be concerned about any effects of EMF, you get the ghost hunters going out with little EMF detectors, or microwave oven detectors, as I call them. You're certainly going to be heavily influenced by the field emanating from, it's probably either 240,000 or 440,000 running through those pylons. So yes, the argument would say that there is a possibility of some kind of hallucinatory effect from those, if such a thing actually does happen. So do any of the accounts, do they focus, I mean, can the accounts of that area predate pylon going in?
No, as far as sorry, my sound seems to have gone awry. As far as I'm aware, the area doesn't have a history of UFO or other anomalous activity. Judging from the witness testimony, the witnesses didn't always experience exactly the same thing, which inclines me to think that their experiences were hallucinatory or had a visionary aspect, possibly paranormal. I'm not saying it wasn't paranormal, but I suspect that what they experienced wasn't physically, objectively out there. It was sort of in their heads. Now, whether something put it there or whether it was some natural phenomenon, I don't know. Another problem about this case is that the witnesses, from my perspective at least, are anonymous. I don't know who they were. Their names weren't revealed. So therefore it's difficult to know, how much credence to give the case. One local man was quoted in a newspaper as suggesting that what the witnesses experienced was a pea harvesting operation going on at night. It's hard to square that prosaic explanation with some of the reported phenomena. And I have to say that these manifestations weren't confined purely to the spot shown in the photograph. The witnesses did go elsewhere and have some odd experiences. One of them at least had a history of paranormal type experiences. So again, it may be a case that we're dealing here with if the reports are genuine, something that are essentially person-centered rather than place-centered. In other words, it may have been incidental that they were at Newton of Falkland. They may have had a paranormal experience anywhere else. It may be the person or the people themselves that were more important than the location. Or it could be an interaction, of course, between the environment, maybe the power lines, as we've said, and a certain susceptibility to unusual experiences on the part of the witnesses.
Absolutely. So have you ever encountered any strange lights in the woods or forests? Then we would like to hear from you. Comment in the comments or post on the Facebook page or YouTube channel, and we will do our best to talk about them and maybe come on, chat to us live on the camera. We would love to have a conversation with you. So Peter, let's move on to our third picture, which is this.
Yeah, this is Cannock Chase in Staffordshire in the English Midlands. And this area has become quite a well-remarked, a frequently mentioned area for a so-called paranormal and UFO type experiences. It seems to have the whole lot almost. I'm probably exaggerating a bit there. UFO reports, alleged Bigfoot sightings, even werewolf type activity, big cats, ghost experiences. It's difficult to interpret the case in some ways because some of the reports are sort of more or less anonymous, or it may be that the names given by writers and are pseudonyms. Unfortunately, people don't always say when they're using pseudonyms, which I think is a bad practice. I think people should always say if a name isn't real. So it's hard to know. The other problem about the area is because of its sort of a folklore, it may attract people who are eager to have experiences, and there could be, of course, misperception in addition or as an alternative to genuinely paranormal experiences. It's also the Midlands, as you'll doubtless know, is a kind of pretty heavily populated area. There aren't that many green areas, so Cannock Chase is a bit of an oasis, really, in an industrial landscape. Probably less light pollution, of course, which could result in people seeing things in the sky that they might not otherwise see. Whether those things are anomalous or just sort of have a prosaic explanation is open to question.
Okay, wonderful. We're going to go on to our fourth, which has got a lovely picture of a chap. Perhaps you can tell us who he is and why he's in this photograph.
This is a colleague of mine, or a friend called Ron Halliday, who's an author of books on UFO phenomena, paranormal. And Ron had met a man called Robert Taylor, who in 1979 had an encounter with a UFO at this spot in a small area of woodland near Livingston in central Scotland. Bob Taylor, as he's known, was a forestry worker with the local Livingston Development Corporation, I think it was. And he went into a clearing in the wood one day, accompanied by his dog, and he saw an object which he subsequently described as a spaceship. I think Rob Taylor described it as sort of hovering. I don't think it was literally landed in a sense. I don't think it was standing on legs. I think it was sort of above the ground. And then a couple of metallic-looking objects with spikes on them, rather like wartime mines, seemed to come towards him. Whether they dropped from the object is perhaps, I'm not entirely sure, but from the testimony. But these balls came towards him and beside his legs, and then he blacked out. And the next thing he remembers coming to, I think he had a headache, a dry mouth, found that he couldn't even talk initially, but his voice recovered. He tried to drive out of the area, but his vehicle had become stuck. I don't know whether it had become stuck in mud before the experience or while he was trying to get away, but he managed to go on foot to his home and told his wife he'd seen this object. Testimony accounts differ slightly on precisely what happened in the immediate aftermath of the reported experience. The police became involved. No one was ever charged. There were some impressions on the ground. However, as I say, the reported UFO, wasn't actually touching the ground. Robert Taylor is regarded as having been an honest, straightforward sort of man. The weakness of this report, of course, it's a single witness case, and there's been a range of theories about what happened, from going from the paranormal end to the more prosaic end. For instance, regarding normal type explanations, it's been suggested that maybe Robert Taylor had a sort of a mini stroke, or The one theory is even that he wasn't even in the wood, that he was at a water treatment plant and then recalled falsely a structure there as the UFO. That's a rather speculative idea. There isn't good evidence that he did have any kind of major neurological problems. He was apparently examined at a hospital in Edinburgh subsequent to the event, and they didn't find any I don't think they found any evidence of seizure activity. So different theories, uncertainties about precisely what happened. And as far as I'm aware, the area isn't a sort of a known hotspot, although around the time of Robert Taylor's experience, there were various other UFO sightings in or around the area, not particularly in the wood. I don't think there were any in the wood itself, but there were other sightings around that time. Problem is that the experience occurred close to Guy Fawkes Night, so I suppose it's conceivable that some of the sightings could have been generated by fireworks. So again, as with most of these cases, there's always that sort of uncertainty which leaves scope for people to question, to doubt, to wonder.
So I can hear from effectively your diagnosis there that in fact your background is clinical psychology, and I'm sure you must have a lot of opinions on some of the sightings and reportings that occur in woodlands just because of the environment they are observed in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm by no means an out-and-out skeptic. In fact, we'll probably be coming on to cases where I'm pretty convinced strange things have happened. But forests and woods, as we were saying before we came on air, a marvelous place is what's called pareidolia. The ability to sort of the tendency to misperceive or see patterns and meaningful stimuli or objects in ambiguous stimuli. In a forest, you've got very complicated patterns of light and color, and those things that you're looking at may be swaying in the wind. There are sounds that may be generated by animals, by wind and other things. There's a great deal of scope for misperception. However, on the other side, it may be that the atmosphere of woods and so on is actually conducive in some people to psychic experiences. So just because you can have pareidolia, misperception and so on, I don't think it rules out the idea that some woodland experiences are of a genuinely anomalous type.
I mean, I referred to the beginning when I said that I'd recently done some paranormal investigations. And one of the problems is then establishing a baseline. Now, any good scientist needs to establish a baseline before you can then have, paranormal means beyond normal. So you need to establish what normal is. And we are very aware now of the new normal. So in an environment, how do you work out what the normal is before you can work out that something is paranormal? Well, in an empty room, you go, right, this room's going to be haunted. Find an empty room. You produce uniform lighting so that there's diffuse lighting with no shadows. No sound sources in the room, no furniture, empty room. Then you have a nice blank canvas. And if suddenly you see a shadow when there can be no shadow, or you suddenly see something move when there's nothing that can be moved, or you hear something moving when there is nothing to be moved, then suddenly you have something that is therefore paranormal. And that's your clinical environment where you can then produce that. Now in the woodlands, no chance. So in twilight, just when things get really excited, of course, we've got all the animals then going off to bed and they're having their last meal and storing food, and then you've got all the nocturnal animals waking up and then rummaging for food and moving around. And so it's incredibly noisy, incredibly active in terms of corner of the eye because things moving everywhere. And of course, you reach that twilight zone when you see a shadow and you think, oh, God, there's someone there, and you realise it's just a tree. You look in that tree a minute ago, it was fine, but now in twilight, it suddenly looks like that person standing there staring at you. So it's the woodland by nature are very difficult to try and get that blank canvas where you're not going to be overstimulated. But as you point out, there are still cases that occur that come beyond any kind of pareidolia or any kind of false readings. Lara, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I'm processing what Dr. McCue said, and also I'm processing what you're saying in the term normal, because it hinges on that, is that all we can really do is test with certain things that we know right, at this point. But there's always the whole idea of out with normal is that it's always going to go into the category of what our instruments can't measure, right? And just arguably, and just stick with me here, guys, right, is that some people are born, right, able to, there's a condition called synthesia. I don't know if you're aware of it. Dr. McCue, have you heard of synthesia before?
I'm sure we have.
Yeah, so there's many different types of synthesia. I think there's about 6 or 7 main types. And really, it's the mind's ability to process information at a point, right, far beyond your average of normal, right? And so they can, as you know, everything's got energy, right? Trees have energy, right? Plants have energy. The earth below you has energy, right? So it's a way of processing this energy and this information at a remarkable rate. I think it's also what the mind's ability and the system's ability is at the fight or flight point as well. Everybody's system does different stuff at fight or flight, right? It goes into a different area, right? And for some people, they're able to see certain things in that type of energy in their mind, whereas other people, their mind will go into a completely different place. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes in the woodlands you do get that environment where that fear factor kicks in because you are exposed in the woods. You're worried. Some people might be terrified of the idea that some ghost is going to come out or some alien. I'm more worried about that there might be another paranormal group or some people or some youths wandering around the woodland. And in some locations, that you have to worry about the idea that there are now wild boar being reintroduced. I'm probably more worried that one of them might come at rather annoyed that we're tramping through there. So again, on a primordial basis, you do have that fear factor raising that you are the noise you're hearing is not some interesting and fascinating supernatural entity. It's potentially something which is going to mean you harm, and therefore your reactions are
That's
heightened.
right. Your fight or flight and what you see in that, based on what your mind has profiled over the years, what its experience, what its perceptions are. The mind is also trying to give you a future glimpse of perception based on what's already, what's already happened right before, right, as a survival technique. But you also get people out there that process by the way that they feel things as opposed to what they see as well. So if they're feeling certain things, right, they're trying to identify what that is, right? So if you're walking along, right, because you do get them as well. Some people are quite familiar in the dark, right? Some people are quite familiar in the wooded lands, right? So really, I would be interested in talking to somebody that's familiar and walking through the woods, are quite comfortable with that, right? They've kind of vibed with that, and then something happens, right? Then something happens. I would love to talk to that person.
Yes. And interestingly, Nora and I did some filming in Clapham Woods last week. And the group that took us there have visited Clapham Woods on a regular basis, and they basically guide people in, which I was thinking, we don't need guides. It was easy because I've been there before, knew the route. But interestingly, after we'd finished filming, it was typical. You go in the light, and then suddenly it's dark, and you think, oh, actually, where am I going now?
Yeah.
They were very keen for us to switch the lights off, and they actually walked us out in total darkness. And I was like, how is that possible?
Wow.
They had a stick, and they could find their way out in no light whatsoever. And I was like, now I go into a lot of haunted locations, and a lot of them I know well enough. In terms of, I know where the steps are. I know that I got to turn into that room, and I know a step down into that room. But that's different when it's wild, and it's a track, and there are roots and bramble grows, which wasn't there last week. And they just managed. I was like, then there's that situation that people are very comfortable about walking through woodlands.
Exactly,
and
right. Their senses have become aligned with what's going on, right? They've learned to be able to see, in the dark with the bramble bushes where they are, where the trees where they are, type thing, right? So imagine if that person saw something in the woods that they weren't, that to me is fascinating. That to me is a totally innocent response to something that's actually happened at that point, where there's no preconception before, no fear factor attached to it, right? That is trying to explain these things, right? A totally black and white view of what's happening at that point. Is it a UFO? Has somebody appeared in the woods? That type of thing.
So I think in terms of the analysis of taking the report, you've almost got to ask that question. It's like, how comfortable are you walking through the woodlands and find out whether...
Yeah.
One thing I think about woods is that I feel safer walking through a wood at night in a really remote area. I don't feel safe in areas maybe near a town. For instance, there's a wood near me just across the road. It's lovely, actually. It looks like ancient forest in some ways. It's small, but I was walking there recently, and I was saddened to see a lot of litter near a magnificent old tree, and people had obviously been partying there, and there was evidence of a fire, I think. Now you can imagine people who are disrespectful of the environment, whether they might be dangerous as well. And therefore, I mean, even those woods, I love those woods. I don't tend to go there at night in the summer, just in case I run into some undesirable types. I think if you were in a more remote area, you're probably quite safe. I mean, I think, Lara, you live in Galloway, and you've got a lot of forests there. I imagine you could go for walks in the forest and not see anyone, and you're probably relatively safe. But on the fringe of a large city or something, the wood might be the hangout for people who aren't too nice to meet.
Well, actually, I don't know. Last year there was a murder and somebody dumped in the woods not far away from here. So can I just say that maybe not from time to time, but that's a rare thing, isn't it, babe? And there's always that song in your head, if you go down in the woods today, that.
I got away with it, but I had an experience in Galloway. I was near a place called Loch Dungeon, and I was on the hills, Loch Dungeon, and I came down into the forest, and I think the car park was supposed to close at 7 o'clock, and I had to make my way through the forest, and what I saw of the forest didn't sort of match up with the map very well. You know what it's like with commercial forests, they're always bulldozing new tracks and so on. And it was getting dark, and fortunately for me, there were some people working in the foresters, and I asked whether I was on the right route, and I was actually more or less on the right route. So I got back to the car park in time, but I was worried, because you can't go in a straight line in these commercial forests where the trees are almost touching each other, and it's boggy and so on. But as I say, I got back okay to the car.
Yeah. Oh, well, no, you're absolutely right. They change these things so often, don't they? Do work in them, pull trees down, they do all sorts. Yeah, absolutely. It is a gorgeous place in Dumfries and Galloway with the wooded areas, I've got to say. We live not far from Seven Staines and the Carrochtree area, the Carrochtree forest, right? And it really is quite beautiful. Very beautiful, very lucky. And the vibration, the energy, it's spectacular.
And reports of alleged big cats as well in that. I think you've got that.
Yes, we probably had a couple of people were talking about the large cats. I saw one coming off from Moffat to Dumfries, that B road there. And I was driving back from Stirling. I had been doing an event that night. I had an assistant with me. It wasn't just me that saw it. She was sat in the car with me. And when you're not expecting to see anything, it was still daylight. It was like starting to get dusky, but it was still you could see everything. And gorgeous summer's night, had a convertible, at that time, the roof was down. And when we were driving along 40, 45 miles an hour, because it wasn't far off coming off the main motorway. And there it was, right? It was huge, right next to the side of the road. It had stripes, it had spots, I'd never seen anything like it in my life, right? It was huge. And I slowed down, that way when you slow down, you're like, I said to my friend, Jackie, my assistant at the time, do you think I should go back? She said, no, keep driving, right? Because there's that temptation that you kind of like, hang on a minute. When you drive past, then you register it. And part of me wanted to go back, but the other part of me, suddenly you could feel the fear because I couldn't identify what it is. And that's what other people are like if they're in the woods, if they're, in an area that they're not expecting something and they're relatively comfortable with the surroundings that they're in, and then you see something. And even better still, if somebody's with you and they see it too, right? Have you had any is there any, to your knowledge, when people have been in the woods, that it wasn't just them that saw it at the time, that they had other people with them and they saw it?
Yes, well, one of the places Jonathan will probably be displaying the photograph. It's of Rendlesham Forest. Now, Rendlesham Forest is well known for an alleged UFO event or series of events from 1980.
Yeah.
But the thing that caught my interest wasn't so much this this controversial series of incidents in 1980, but reports that people continue to have odd experiences in the woods. I think after the 1980 incident, it was publicized, it drew lots of people with an interest in ghostly phenomena, UFOs, to visit the wood and maybe make pilgrimages at night. And people had come away from these trips with reports of having odd experiences, apparitions, seeing maybe missing time and that kind of thing. But one phenomenon which was reported to me firsthand by several witnesses was being in the forest and a stone falling down near them. And the stone, when picked up, was found to be hot or warm. And now this was interesting because it was coming from different witnesses. They weren't all present at the same time. It seemed unlikely to me there was one of them was a hoaxer, because he or she would have had to been doing it repeatedly over a long period of time. So that was intriguing. But the thing that fascinated me about this was that this is an objective phenomenon. It's not something that can be attributed to pareidolia, for instance. It's not someone reports seeing a fairy in the trees, which could be just the pattern of the leaves or something they're misperceiving. But this was a very objective phenomenon. And the stones reportedly involved in these incidents are typically described as, or are described as smooth. Maybe not like the kind of stones you might normally find there. Now, I suppose it's conceivable that some kind of perpetual prankster with a catapult is warming up stones and firing stones in the vicinity of walkers in the forest at all sorts of times. But it's a poltergeisty type phenomenon. And it's intriguing. And one of the thoughts I've had about these reports from Rendlesham Forest, these ongoing reports, I'm not talking about the 1980 incident necessarily, but these more recent phenomena, is whether they're unconsciously generated by the people who visit the forest in the hope of having these experiences, whether there's a sort of group mind effect. This is just one possibility. They go to the forest, they're wanting to experience unusual phenomena, and let's say that minds can interact subconsciously and exert psychokinetic and other paranormal effects. It could be that these people are actually generating the phenomena themselves. Or another possibility is that some kind of independent intelligence that likes to, orchestrate tricks and so on, that could be involved.
And it couldn't be like part of a comet, or like there's like through the, if it comes through an atmosphere and stuff, and it's all like hot by the time it lands, or
meteorite.
A meteorite. Sorry. Yes. Sorry.
Yeah. I think the way the stones have fallen suggests more of an intelligence. I mean, one of the witnesses I interviewed in 27, I think it was, told me that I think 3 occasions in the same area one night, he asked out loud, I think it was, "Are you from another dimension?" And the stone obligingly fell. And then he asked, "Can you make us?" I think he asked whether a stone could be deposited behind him, and one obligingly fell there. Something like, I'd have to check my source, but the stone, the phenomenon seemed interactive. It wasn't impersonal and random, which therefore I doubt whether it was something purely kind of just a meteorite breaking up or something like that. It sounded like an interactive type phenomenon. The kind of thing you get in poltergeist cases, although poltergeist cases tend to be associated with particular people, whereas these stone dropping phenomena in Rendlesham Forest seem to be associated to some extent with the place. I did actually contact the forest ranger. This was back in, I think, about 27, asking whether any of the forestry workers had experienced this manifestation, but he didn't seem to be aware of any of them having experienced that.
Peter, we've had a question. Oh, sorry, Lauren.
It's fascinating. I'm really fascinated on interactive stones and the fact that it had intelligence. That's amazing.
Yes, in fact, when we do investigations, we sometimes get stone throwing, or there might be a phenomena which appears random, but the minute we can then get it to repeat on command, and as you said, it then looks like we're detecting with some independent intelligence. I love that expression. Then it becomes interesting. So the only thing I thought is, depending in terms of the stone, was it more of an apport that drops, or was it thrown?
Well, there was one of the informants told me that he was at the time. I think it was the one I've just mentioned, the man I've just mentioned. There was an occasion when a stone sort of dropped to the ground between his legs, but he was wearing a rucksack at the time, and therefore it's hard to sort of see how the stone could have come from above, because it would have presumably hit the rucksack. So whether it just sort of materialized between his legs, I don't, or he was just mistaken in thinking it couldn't have fallen from above. I don't know.
So I think I was going to say one of the possibilities, if they appeared thrown, they had trajectory. Then it potentially, if someone was holding, it was a particularly cold night, and someone had them in their hands, waiting for the opportunity to throw them. Then, when they arrived at the suspect person, they would be warm because they'd been in someone's hand who was throwing them. So that's potentially where the warmth would come. But apports that just drop, it's more difficult to fake that, because someone in your vicinity has the ability to drop it from above, as opposed to something comes flying out. Then it widens the possibilities.
Yeah, the witnesses I spoke to regarding the temperature of the stones, or how hot they seemed, the descriptions, as I recall, varied between warm or fairly warm and hot. So I could understand the warm being as a result of it's being in the hand of someone, a prankster or something like that. But a hot stone, if that's the correct recollection, seems a little more. If it were a prank, I suppose you could imagine someone with a lighter, giving it a bit of extra heat before using.
Did they describe whether the stone was smooth or rough?
Smooth.
Oh, right. Smooth. So it definitely wasn't a meteorite. All meteorites are very rough texture, because effectively they have burnt on the way. And usually you can tell by their smell as well. They are particularly smelly, usually a very high iron content, which then reacts to the old environment and produces hydrogen sulfide. So they've got this particular very metallic and slightly eggy smell to them. We have had someone comment. Carmen has asked, have you ever heard of the black-eyed children in woods? So sightings of black-eyed children.
I have heard of the black-eyed children phenomenon. According to sort of rumour, there have been some sightings in Cannock Chase, or on Cannock Chase. However, I haven't seen much. I don't think I've seen any clear-cut testimony from named witnesses, so I'm not sure how valid that particular claim is. But black-eyed children the phenomenon has been reported for some years. It's where someone's maybe at home and there's a knock on the door. You open the door and you see some children asking to come in. Please let us in. And the person notices that they're black, their eyes are completely black, and maybe is shaken up by this and frightened by it, and then closes the door on the people, and is maybe traumatized by it. It's been suggested that if you do let them in, it may be bad for you, but I think most of the accounts I've read, people have not let them in.
That's quite terrifying, the idea that someone knocks on the door and says, "Can I come in?" vampire style. It might be where there's I think there's a play that a book that turned into a play and a film, Let the Right One In. This idea that something just turns up on your doorstep and gets into your house is quite a terrifying thought.
There are a couple of books that you if people are interested in this, following up by David Weatherly. I think it's David Weatherly, an American researcher. He's written a couple of books, I think. I've got two books by him, I think, on the subject. Lots of case reports in there, quite intriguing, quite creepy stories. I mean, these kind of warm stones or hot stones in Venetian forest are fairly benign things. It's not terrible. You wouldn't be traumatized by that, but I think seeing black-eyed kids coming to your house asking to be let in, it might be a different matter.
Absolutely. I had a few people join us. Hello, Ruth, and Lorna and Adam. welcome. If anyone's got any questions for Dr. McCue or anything about woods and hauntings and sightings and UFO or strange beasts, do let us know. We've got about 15 minutes left of the show. Oh, Laura.
Pick me. Ooh, I know. What's the most haunted wood that you've ever been in, Dr. McCue? Or the most haunted you've heard of?
Sorry, what was that last question?
Or perhaps if you've not been there, which have you heard? What's been the most spectacular one that you've heard of, even if other people have experienced it?
Well, the most spectacular one I've heard of was a hoax case. There's a wood in Kent called Deering Wood near Pluckley, the village of Pluckley. Now, Pluckley is a village which, according to folklore, has been the setting for numerous sort of ghostly type events. But there's a wood near there called Deering Wood, Dering. It's named after a former landowning family. And you can find reports on the internet claiming that in 1948, the bodies of 20 people were found there. 11 of those people being children. And then 50 years later, some students went into the wood and disappeared and were never seen again. Now, both of these stories, I think, are complete balderdash. You can find on the internet a newspaper cover from 1948, purportedly a newspaper, which describes the discovery of these bodies. And there's a picture, a black and white type picture of what seemed to be bodies on the ground. But the whole thing's an obvious hoax. In fact, I think the people who created this image of the newspaper, they maybe didn't even expect it to be taken seriously, because there are some obvious giveaways. I mean, one up in the top, I think, right-hand corner, the price of the newspaper is given as 1p, but we didn't have decimalization of our currency until I think it was 1972 or 71, about that time anyway. So a penny in those days would have been a D, not a P. There's even a website address, I think, at the bottom of the article. So this news item is obviously a hoax. The photograph showing the bodies, apparently that was a photograph from Lithuania, I think from 1945. So the newspaper report's being cobbled together, as a joke or a hoax. But it's mentioned on the internet, and people can be so credulous as if this has really happened. You can probably find sites there where according to reports, these people disappeared, which could give the wood a kind of a really bad reputation or a really creepy reputation, and yet completely undeserved. I mean, I visited the wood. Just because I didn't experience anything there doesn't, of course, nullify any real testimony. And it's a very pleasant place, but this is just a load of garbage, I think. And unfortunately, the reputation the wood has acquired for being a kind of dark spot for paranormal activity has attracted the kind of people I was referring to earlier, who like fires, leave litter, and that sort of thing. And I think it's caused some damage and cost to put it right. So that's the most dramatic one. As far as evidentiality is concerned, in terms of real evidence, the case that in the book that perhaps impressed me most was the one I've mentioned, the Rendlesham Forest, not the 1980 incident, but these ongoing phenomena and the stone falling, because that doesn't seem easily explicable in terms of misperception. So that in terms of evidence, that one I found quite good.
Wow.
There are lots of cases I mentioned where information isn't really available. I mean, some intriguing cases. There's one report from years ago of a family in the New Forest who saw, or thought they saw, a sort of stone in a lake with what seemed to be a sword, something reminiscent of the King Arthur legend. And they made a phenomenal number of visits over subsequent years to try and locate this spot. They never found it again. Now, unfortunately, I've searched for further evidence, and I haven't, I haven't, got any confirmatory evidence of this story. So whether it was an invented tale, or whether, one possible explanation is that the conditions were misty. I think they mentioned mist actually, and it was a kind of an illusion created by mist. I had an experience. I was driving west near Bucclivie, not far from Stirling, some years ago with my son, and there's an area to my left called Flanders Moss, a low-lying area, and as I looked across there, I saw a loch, a lake, and I was puzzled and disoriented because I knew the area quite well, and I knew there wasn't the lake there or a loch there, but it was actually a ground mist, and it was really creating an effective illusion of a loch. So
Wow.
it was a good example of how you misinterpret things momentarily.
Wow, that's fascinating. Good Lord. So I think I agree with you about when you were saying about the bodies and that there was like a website address and I can't believe people would go to those extraordinary lengths in order to make something look something completely different. Surely the fascination is in if it's real, not to make it look unreal.
Yeah. I think it may have been a joke that wasn't intended to deceive. If you do something, you hoax something so obviously, it's just to make people laugh, not to give the impression that a historical event occurred. But I think the eagerness of people to believe and want to believe in all sorts of dramatic stuff, and the lack of critical faculty that people bring to some of these things, it reflects badly on the whole area, really, the area of interest. But people are willing to believe things like that. I've got a little book, and it's not, to be honest, a very well-written book. It mentions the case. There's no mention that the story's a hoax. And if you were naive enough to just take it at face value, reading that book, you might think, this is, my goodness. But when you think about it, if an incident of that severity or magnitude, in a sense, had occurred, the place would be etched on the national consciousness. It would be up there with the Moors murders, wouldn't it? Everyone would know about the case. But and the wood would probably be closed off to the public if it was the mystery. But it's not. It's just a phony story.
Well, Dr. McCue, have you actually? Are there any of the woods in that you've got experience in, of knowledge of, that have been prone to maybe some? Because you mentioned the Moors murders there, and that if you've been to the Moors, that's got a very distinct vibe, hasn't it? It's got a very weird feeling. So is it because we know what's happened there, or is it because it actually does have that feeling? So with that in mind, are there any woods that you have knowledge of that have that weird feeling, and that actually there have been a series of macabre events take place that we know to be true?
I'm not sure. As I say, with some of these reports, the evidence, the testimony is a little bit vague. There's one chapter in the book, for instance, where I briefer reports where I mentioned Deering Wood as one, but there are other reports there where different woods have such and such has happened, but often there's little in the way of named witness, with named witnesses, so it's difficult to tell. I'm open to both possibilities. I mean, I do believe that genuinely paranormal phenomena occur, so I'm open to the possibility that there are cases where if people have uncomfortable feelings, it could be due to something that's not just suggestion. There was a case I investigated in Scotland years ago. It wasn't particularly a woodland case, but near Loch in the Highlands, near Inverness, and this area, to history and folklore, had been a setting for a number of ghostly type events, including sightings of phantom warriors, some sort of phantom battle. And an article appeared in the Scots magazine some years ago, and I was in touch with the author, and he'd gone to the Loch to do some fishing with a friend, and he hadn't heard about any history of supernatural paranormal activity. And while they were there, they got a very distinct and uncomfortable feeling that something wasn't right, and they actually abandoned the fishing trip. And then as they were heading back, or even just before that, the man got the sense that his car had a puncture, and indeed when they got back to it, the vehicle was a puncture. So they left the area, and it was only subsequently, allegedly, that he discovered that this area has this reputation. So assuming this report was genuine, I have no reason to think the man was lying, and I presume his memory isn't wrong. Maybe he did pick up on something about the area. However, it's with a lot of these kind of old ghost cases that may be genuine, I think the activity is of fairly low intensity. For instance, I was in touch with a man, a local farmer, who told me that his parents had an unusual experience there years ago, but he lived there, and obviously he told me he hadn't personally experienced anything. I think that's what he said to me anyway. So in other words, there's someone living there. So if you or I were to go there, and I have been there a few times, in fact, but the likelihood of you experiencing anything, unless you're very sensitive to these things, is probably low. Because and in fact, as far as I'm aware, the phenomena probably petered out now.
So we won't be packing our bags. We won't be packing our bags and heading up there anytime soon.
I can send you some information on it if you're interested. Yes,
that'd be fascinating. Thank you. That'd be amazing.
We do have another wood to talk about, another photograph. It is this.
Oh, now that's
right.
Good
Dave,
God.
I've got to speak about Dave Pickersgill. I was in touch with him recently because there was a wood. It's near Stocksbridge in South Yorkshire, which has a little bit of a story attached to it. I can mention that if we've got time. But I saw some pictures of the wood taken by David, and it wasn't in connection with the paranormal. I think Dave's an outdoors man and a photographer and so on. And I was just impressed with his photography, and he kindly has allowed me to use some of his pictures. He sent me pictures and allowed me to use them. And I mean, as you can see from this one, they're just superb. Now, this wood is interesting because I think Dave's belief is that the wood has probably become known as spooky wood because of the strange appearance of the trees. Although there was a story in one of Jenny Randall's books, told of us, I think it was an experience reported to her that occurred in, I think it was 1948 again, of a woman who was camping in the wood with friends, and they were in a tent, and they heard a horse coming towards them, galloping straight towards them. And I think they probably felt alarmed, thinking this animal was coming straight for them. But when they went out and looked, there was no sign of the horse at all. And this woman was apparently told by local farmers that they'd sometimes seen lights in this area of woodland. I don't know whether the lights were within the trees or above the trees, but this is spooky wood. But if you wanted good pictures of it, this man Dave Pickersgill has got some crackers.
I mean, it does look a fascinating area. I mean, the root structure is, I mean, that would look creepy at any time of day.
There's a wood in Romania called the Hoia wood or the Hoia forest, which has, according to folklore and reports, is supposed to be very paranormally active. To be honest, I'm pretty doubtful about the case. I've looked at some more critical examination of the case, one or two critical examinations of the case, and I think there may be a little bit of exaggeration and dramatization going on here. But one of the things about the Hoia forest, as with spooky wood in near Stocksbridge, it's got these trees which have this very atmospheric appearance, which perhaps contribute to the ghostly feel of the place.
Absolutely. So, Peter, thank you so much. That has been absolutely fascinating. I mean, it backs up all our experiences of when we go into woodlands, and it's like a mixture of exhilaration of all life and the energy that there. And then sometimes there's a little bit of like, oh, okay, what's that round the corner?
I've got to say, that was fascinating. I don't think I'm going to be looking at woods in the same light again. And I'm a medium. But I think I'm armed with more information now, I've got to say. And I love that last picture, Dr. McCue. Wow. That is some incredible picture, I've got to say. I found your stories fascinating, and some of the facts are incredible. Right, I'm still stuck in the hot stone bit falling from the sky. Honestly, I'm still.
That is fascinating. Yeah.
I've got to say, I've really enjoyed you coming on. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom and your insight with us. And it's been fascinating. And it'd be wonderful to have you on at some point again in the future, if that's okay.
That's okay. Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to you.
So, thank you so much, Dr. Peter McCue, talking all about haunted woods. His books are out there. We've got a review on our website. Have a look. There are links to go and buy it there as well. Well worth a read. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a good week. Thank you.
Thank you.
So wasn't that interesting?
Oh, fascinating. I've got to say, a lot of woods are quite creepy. I'm very highly sensitive, right? So there is an element, of me of kind of like whites of the eyes before I go in there. But I did spend a lot of my childhood in the woods. I don't know if you did, Jonathan, building, like the kids, like your dens in the wood and stuff like that. And myself and my brother spent a lot of time because we had woods just literally outside the back door. So I do have a familiarity vibe there as well. But I can see how I mean, it can hide a multitude, can't it?
Oh, yes.
Never mind the vibe.
So, Laura, did you know that we're on TV?
I know Pat was saying, and I'm thinking, God, we've gone global. Look, we're on telly.
So Pat and Dominic and Adam has been saying he's been watching us on TV. So they said it's the new way to watch us. Is either through I'm guessing either through Facebook or even YouTube. You could go on, because we're streaming to YouTube as well. So subscribe to our YouTube channel. Apparently, it's much better on a big screen. Will it better, bigger?
It's like Netflix, Now TV, Gaia TV, all rolled into one here, isn't it?
I'm not quite sure I'd want to see myself that large.
We've got somebody coming on next week that's backed by popular demand, haven't we?
Indeed. We are going to be joined next week by Dr. Jack Hunter, who will be talking about mediums, because when he was on last time talking about fairies, he talked about when he was an undergraduate, I think it was, and he joined a circle in Bristol and talked about some fascinating experiences he was having when he was sitting in a circle and a trance medium was working some physical mediumship. So he's going to be telling us more about that and all his research into mediums. So over to you, Lara, that's your subject.
Oh, I can't wait. Guys, we're talking about mediums next week, and some of the information that he's got will probably just blow your mind. Honestly, I for one cannot wait. And also we're going to we're on telly doing this as well. So get your TVs hooked up, guys. All right. And what's more, listen, you can't do the interactive thing on Now TV, Netflix and Gaia and all the rest of it, right? So this is a bonus, isn't it?
Sure.
Doing it this way on Supernatural, you don't just get to watch and listen to all the fascinating people that we're lucky enough to have on our show. You get to interact as well. How amazing is that?
Pat says she's going to do it this way all the time now. She's going to watch us on TV.
That's what I'm almost fascinated as well to get the telly set up at the same time, Jonathan. Right? Do you think we could do that?
Watch ourselves. Go to TV, watch ourselves. Forget and actually just go, oh, it's me.
It's us. Yeah. Hang on, I'm about to say something. That's right. Guys, it's been fascinating this week. It's been wonderful to have you all on board and to actually be there when everybody's discovered that they could get it on telly as well has been an honor. We look forward to having you with us next week. Thank you so much for joining us and have an amazing week. Make good choices, everybody, and we will catch up next week. Bye-bye for now.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.